Hey, how's it going, everybody? This is Shaun here for another edition of Shaun Solo. We're going to be doing a quick and dirty, another audio cast for doing a review of Axiom Verge, the recently released kind of Castlevania, Metroidvania-esque, kind of old school retro platformer. It just came out on PC and PlayStation 4. I believe it's coming to Xbox One at some point. I'm not sure about Mac. It might be on the Mac. But yeah, just kind of wanted to share some of my thoughts. I mean, the way we've always done reviews on this channel is pretty informal. And this is kind of me just sussing out how I feel about it. I mean, I have obviously put some thought into it before I sat down in terms of things I liked, things I didn't like, improvements I felt could have been made, or just kind of maybe the fact that the game is a little bit beholden to its retro roots. Because this is not something new, right? Like, it's almost become a cliche at this point. Indie games kind of riffing off of older classic retro games from the, anywhere from the NES to the Super NES to the Sega Genesis era. That's become pretty standard. Some do it better than others. I think a really good example of a game that does it really well is Shovel Knight, because while that game looks and feels like an NES game, it is very modern in its actual mechanics. It's a game that embraces all those other things, makes basically the most perfect NES game that could possibly be ever made, probably more perfect than it could have been made on the original system, and kind of updates it with some stuff. So on that note, let's talk about Axiom Verge, a game that I kind of expected to load up and maybe play for a few hours. I got really engrossed in it. I did not expect to. It was really fun, but just like a lot of those old retro games, like I go back and play, the Super Metroids and stuff like that, and I always lose interest within a few hours, so I kind of expected the same thing to happen here, because a lot of what propels me to finish video games in general is kind of narrative based. I need that strong narrative. I want that strong narrative. I mean, it's only been in the past few years that I've kind of gotten back into platformers at all, honestly. I've always been into things like adventure games and, the point and click style, and so I've just kind of always been more invested in character and story than necessary mechanics. Like, a good story could pull me through kind of a mediocre game. But those games are super sparse in terms of, narratives. And there's logistical reasons for them, mechanical reasons for that. Axiom Verge kind of has the same type of thing in terms of the way it tells a story, which is kind of sparse, a little obtuse. It's more meaty than, say, Super Metroid specifically. Because this is what that game culls from the most, well, probably more Metroid. It's kind of sparse, it's a little bit of obtuse, but there is some stuff there. It's actually a fairly interesting story. It's very simple at the end of the day, but it's got some interesting themes and ideas in it, and that kind of kept me going a little bit. It was a little too sparse for my taste. I think it's one of those things that, like I said before, it's best when these games kind of take advantage of the fact that they are actually modern, and not just be so beholden to kind of that era. Not that this game is in totality, it's not. But narratively, I kind of wish there was a little bit more of a stronger narrative, because the story was interesting, and I did want to learn more about it. I did want to learn more about the characters and stuff. It is a really beautiful, cool aesthetic that trumps, the games that it's riffing on. It really does. It's kind of in the same way that Shovel Knight is like the most perfect game that could have been made of that style for that era, for the retro era. I think Axiom Verge is very similar in that respect. It's a beautiful game. It's got like a lot of just beautiful, even like the level designs, the colors, some of just like the characters, and like the design of the bosses is really interesting and kind of just cool on a superficial level, but there's also some thought put into it once you kind of get a little more information about the story. Then you have like these big machine android things that's on actually like kind of the main cover is one of the characters, the looming kind of female looking head. that's communicating with you as you go through the game, and you're not sure of the intentions of anybody because you're kind of just thrown right into the middle of it, and it's, so it's mysterious to the character as well. But before we get back into that, I'll loop back around to that stuff maybe, and for my closing thoughts. Yeah, so let's talk about some nuts and bolts stuff with the game. So ostensibly, this game is a platformer, for lack of a better term. I know people like to use the term Metroidvania. It's appropriate. It does have a lot of similarities, obviously. But especially in the sense that a lot of level layouts, especially kind of like the connecting sections, are kind of vertical. So you're doing this vertical climb thing, very similar to like Super Metroid and stuff. The difference is that your speed of traversal is kind of slow, which is kind of a knock against the game. I mean, the jumping and everything, it feels great, but I kind of was expecting the whole game to get because a lot of this stuff is predicated on getting power-ups and finding new devices, and that is what opens the game up, and that's how you get to more levels, and as you open more stuff up, you have longer journeys back towards something because now you have the device to unlock it. So I was kind of expecting them to have some kind of speed dash or some kind of run mechanic or some kind of teleportation system, because that actually does drag the game down. Once you hit, I would say, you've been playing it for 10 hours, there comes a point where you're just like, oh god, I would really just like to just kind of zoom back there as quick as possible, because enemies respawn, so every time you go through an area, you are going to have to be just as meticulous as the first time. I'm sure you're going to be more familiar with certain enemy patterns and stuff like that, and kind of the better ways to deal with those enemies, because everyone kind of has a slightly unique tinge to it. There's a unique kind of strategy for all the various enemy types. Some easier than others, obviously. But so it kind of made it a real slog towards the last third of the game, just because there is just so much backtracking involved in large sections of it. I mean, you have to backtrack a lot, and it's not like a 5-minute thing. It's no, it's going to take you 10-15 minutes to get back to a door you couldn't open or an area you couldn't get into. So I thought if they had you made some kind of upgrade or something like that you could have acquired that would have made traversal easier, or if your save points, there was a way at a certain point of the game they became I don't know, portals or whatever, transporters, that would have been a nice addition in terms of just making it a little bit, because it feels padded. It feels that those sections are padded out, and I don't think that is the intention from the developer. I mean, this game was made by one dude, pretty much, Tom Happ. So, hats off to you, Tom. This is a really incredible achievement for a singular person. But because I don't think, you can make the argument, well, that kind of breaks the game in certain ways, I guess, because it's not designed to be that way. But I think that's one of those things, like I was talking about before, that's just a little too beholden to old formats, and it could have used a little bit of updating. I mean, even in those older games, by the time you're in the Super Nintendo era and you for instance, Super Metroid, there is kind of a faster way to traverse through the level. So when you have to do the backtracking, it's a little easier. It's not as painful and as kind of dragged out and boring. But so going into I guess the upgrades and stuff like that you get, there's various amounts of weapons you get to pick up, and and then there's also kind of health and range updates or upgrades rather that you can kind of pick up, and a lot of the upgrades, just like in these kind of games, are all in kind of secret hidden areas and stuff like that. There's one interesting thing, is the decoder gun. You see a lot of artifacting, purposefully animated artifacting and stuff in the game. And the cool thing about this thing, it kind of, you can read codes which will then open more secret areas, and those secret areas usually have things your health upgrades and your range upgrades, and also notes. So you're picking up notes from that help you piece together the story. And the thing is, some of the stuff is so obtuse. Some of the notes you pick up, they're written in different languages and stuff, because there's 3 different races kind of at play. They all have their own perspectives and their own opinions about what's going on. And like the barrier to actually understand the story is kind of high because it's predicated on finding and figuring out a lot of the secret stuff. Like the codes, for instance. Like you will get this thing that like can input codes and it affects the world a little bit. Some of them open secret areas. Some of them translate these notes. So it's just like, I don't know. Like if you're gonna have a narrative in a game and then you're gonna lock away like half the narrative from people based on like their ability to find your obtuse secrets, I have a problem with that, honestly. Because like I just don't. Why wouldn't you just want a clear narrative? I guess I understand that it gives incentive for people to like really explore the world and stuff, but I think there could have been better ways to do that. Honestly, I think there just could have been a more elegant solution to that problem in terms of if you want to encourage people to explore more. I mean, that's my opinion. Obviously, this whole thing's my opinion. But other than that, it is good because it is. I do like the weapon variety and stuff. I mean, but just in the same case as a lot of these games, you are gonna end up just using like only a few of the weapons because it's kind of fits whatever your play style is. Some are stronger than others. Like I ended up just using like the Axiom blaster thing for the vast majority of the game. I don't know if that made it harder or easier for me, but it was just the one that like just worked for me the best. Especially once I had gotten a few power upgrades and stuff, like I was just wrecking fools. And every once in a while, I'd catch myself in situations where it would be suited for other weapons, but I would say 80% of the time I use the Axiom gun. But even though like my choice was to use that one weapon for most of the game, I think it's cool on a design level that the game is malleable in the sense that you can play it however you would like to play it, and whatever weapon you find the most successful in your play style, it's very welcoming to that. So that's a cool thing. I think that's really great. I'm more of just like a brute player, so I picked the brute gun, the brute weapon, if you will. But yeah, I mean, other than the fact that it's a very tight, well-designed platformer that maybe is a little bit too long, and then there's maybe a little bit too much backtracking. Honestly, I thought that like I said before, it just gets it really bogs things down after a certain point because once you kind of get through your initial like 5 or 6 hours of excitement and exploring the world and things like that, it can be a little aggravating. Just because like there's especially once you hit that 5 or 6 hour mark, you're gonna have to backtrack a lot. I'm not trying to harp on this part of it because I understand I understand if people say, well, it's that kind of game and we like that kind of game, so we're happy it's made that way. Hey, that's perfectly fine. For me, I just found it frustrating more than fun or interesting and what was disappointing about that was that the game had been so interesting up to that point. Because there's times where you're not sure where you got to go and you get stuck, and there's certain areas you can kind of get into but can only get into so far, so you can backtrack a whole like through like 4 or 5 sections and then unlock the door, go through the door, and then not be able to jump up to the next ledge or area. That was really frustrating because it doesn't there's no indicator that I'm going to need more than just my one ability, a new ability to open this door to actually explore the area. So that was kind of frustrating, and just what compounded that frustration was just having to go back and forth and back and forth and exploring it. There's some cool things you can do. You can always bring up your map, and there's a neat little thing where you can kind of there's 2 reminders you can place. So if you're okay, all right, I need to figure out what I need to get for this level. So once I find something that is gonna allow me to further explore this area, I gotta come back here. So you can mark it on your map. That way you're not just blindly kind of going through. But having said that, I didn't actually use it that much because I didn't really realize it was there until I was almost done with the game. You're gonna go through these areas so much that you're gonna know them very well. Very, very well. And then there is some some color coding that kind of also helps you in terms of kind of the periphery of the doors. That kind of give you a hint that you're about to go into a certain area. So as long as you can remember those kind of visual cues, you'll probably be okay, even if you don't use the marker system. But going back to the story, like I said, I thought it was disappointing that like a lot of the story is locked away in kind of the 2 secret areas and stuff. I stand by that. I don't think. I think it's just it's a poor choice in my opinion. Just because it is actually an interesting story, and I kind of would have liked it to have a little bit more concreteness to it. I did actually end up finding every note. I figured out the codes. Like I'm almost 100% at every aspect of this game. So even I was still like a little like what, like what's really going on. So I went to message boards and stuff, and I was like, okay, well that makes sense. I don't want to spoil the story here for everybody here, but like you could play this game and not like understand anything if you're not like really paying attention and really reading into things, which maybe is by design to a certain extent. But that's life. There is one aspect of the game that I can say is great with no caveats, is undisputed, and that is the score. The score is amazing for this game, not just for video games, but just for just a piece of music in general. It's really varied, really propulsive, and kind of just sets the mood and the tone. Every new area has its own kind of musical piece, and it all fits really well. It's one of the best game scores I've heard, and scores in general I've heard in a really long time. It immediately, like if you go back and watch my kind of checking it out video, my little Let's Play video of the first like hour or so, it's the thing that immediately struck me was the music. It's incredibly memorable, and that's something I would actually probably drive around in my car and listen to. So I guess I'll just kind of wrap this up. My final thoughts on Axiom Verge. I think I was surprised by how much I enjoyed this game. I did not expect to get into it. I didn't honestly expect to finish it. I thought like I would put 5 or 6 hours into it, be like, oh, that was really cool, that was interesting, but it kind of, the magic's gone after a while. Sometimes with these kind of like old retro games, usually there's always a point where I'm just like, well, okay, that's interesting, but I don't have any interest in like kind of grinding through the rest of it. But from mechanically and even just like the aesthetic and the interesting world, and even though the story's a little obtuse and I wish it was a little more straightforward in presentation anyways, it kept me invested, it kept me engrossed. So if you're on the fence about it, I would say give it a chance. Maybe don't buy it right away, like maybe wait for a sale or something like that. $20 is kind of a high price point. I mean, if you were to talk about value equals time that you will spend, it is worth $20. You're gonna get a lot of time out of this, and especially if you like it, there's a lot of reasons to go back and replay the game. There's even like a built-in system for speedrunners, which is cool. Like I thought that was really neat. And this is actually a game I would love to see some speedruns of. Probably some really interesting stuff. Like this would be a great addition to something like Awesome Games Done Quick, their summer or their winter one. So yeah, really interesting game. Solid mechanics, solid platformer. If you have any type of inclination towards the Metroid games, I would say buy it now. It's like it's going to be worth your time in that respect. I do wish they had made a little bit more modern concessions, and just in terms of traversal and stuff like that. But it's not a game killer. I think you're still going to be able to enjoy it overall, even with a few caveats. So that's going to do it for me. I'm Shaun, and I will talk to you guys next time I have something to talk about.